Thank you so much, Marina. Thrilled to be here. Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Jackson. I'm the Executive Director of the New Law Lab at Northeastern University School of Law. We are an interdisciplinary innovation laboratory, which has been around since 2013. We're working at the intersection of creative arts and law to come up with new forms of legal empowerment. Legal empowerment meaning giving people the tools, the resources, the understanding to be able to access and activate and enforce their legal rights without necessarily having to hire a lawyer. I am joined by my fabulous co-facilitator.
Hi, everyone. My name's Emily Law. I'm a second-year student at Northeastern University School of Law, and I'm really glad to be here.
We are going to tell you a story. We're going to tell you a story about how Northeastern Law School stood up a team of student change makers to meet the enormous need that was present across Massachusetts and Boston, and frankly, across the entire nation, when it came to filing for unemployment insurance and pandemic unemployment insurance. We're going to tell this sort of in a narrative format and sort of give you as much as we can in terms of the context of standing up the project. But the real fun is going to be when Emily goes into the weeds and the details of exactly how we were able to structure and operate a team of exclusively student change makers responding to a very urgent need locally as it relates to unemployment insurance and filing. So hopefully you all can see my slide deck. I think that's the case. If not, please let me know. Let's go back in time, 1 year back. Everybody's been doing this, right? We've all been doing this. Probably multiple presentations today have already done this. The New York Times just ran a big fabulous thing that said, when did you know the world was changing? For me, it was when the weekend that my husband and I spent with the old sewing machine on the dining room table, sewing masks for ourselves because we couldn't find any. March 2020, the world really changed. The law school came to a screeching halt in the middle of March. I don't remember exactly what date it was, but it was right around March 15th, right about now. The rest of the world came to, I wouldn't say screeching halt. Many things kicked into high gear, many did not. But what the reality on the ground for us was that there were a lot of students at the School of Law who were suddenly had time on their hands because of the way that we moved into remote learning and the way that our co-op program got interrupted. Time on their hands and a desire to do something meaningful to respond to the pandemic in real time. I'm sure you all have memories of March 2020. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So the genesis of this project was some outreach that happened when Greater Boston Legal, which is the local legal aid provider here in Boston. These are the folks who are able to take on legal representation for folks who are at or below a certain level of the federal poverty guideline. Greater Boston Legal Services reached out to us to say that they were overwhelmed with the number of requests they were receiving for people who were trying to access unemployment insurance in Massachusetts and were having difficulty doing so, and they needed help. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons why people were having difficulty accessing unemployment insurance is the platform UI Online, the mechanism by which people actually applied for unemployment insurance in Massachusetts, was only available through a browser, desktop, laptop configuration. No app, mobile phone access was allowed, and the application was only in English language. So the UI Online was significantly deficient in terms of being able to handle the influx of individuals in the Boston metropolitan region who were seeking help. Greater Boston Legal Services was getting a lot of calls, a lot of emails, and they were beginning to generate a spreadsheet of all the people with their contact information who needed help applying for unemployment online. So they reached out to us here at Northeastern University. Again, I run the New Law Lab, which is our interdisciplinary innovation laboratory. I had just come off an effort with our domestic violence clinic, where we were asked to engage as sort of the innovation experts to help take the domestic violence clinic online, which had previously not operated virtually, but had been on the ground in the courts, the surrounding courts in Boston. And so we had just come off of that project, a really quick stand-up, about a 3-week project, and we were ready for another opportunity to help people in the Greater Boston region who were having difficulty applying for unemployment insurance. Emily, what did it look like from the student perspective?
Yeah, so as Dan was saying, March changed a lot of things for everyone, but I think especially students from elementary on up to graduate students. So we were told to take our textbooks home that Friday, clear out our lockers just in case we weren't coming back, and lo and behold, we didn't. I remember taking my textbooks to the art museum because I was meeting my friend. Apologizing to the coat check man for my giant book bag of textbooks. And then they told us the next week that we were not coming back, at least for weeks. So students that were on co-op, which is Northeastern's internship program in the spring, were forced to either go virtual or they were canceled entirely. So that forced us to find something to supplement that experience to satisfy graduation requirements. And then many students like myself who would be on co-op for the summer quarter were told that their co-ops were canceled, or we were never able to secure an opportunity in the first place, which is where I was, because many employers decided not to hire students for the summer due to the uncertainty. So I definitely pretty much given up since it was my first co-op in law school. So I didn't have any of the legal experience that made it easier to get the second co-op. The first one's always the hardest. So I'd pretty much resigned myself to taking classes and pushing off co-op till the fall, which is something I really didn't want to do because those of us who were scheduled for co-op were pretty hopeful that the pandemic would be over in a few months and we wouldn't have to experience Zoom School of Law, as it became affectionately known on Facebook and elsewhere. So luckily, Dan came to the rescue of several of us, and I ended up seeing his call for help in the law school's Monday newsletter and sent him an application, and he interviewed me. And
I love the fact that Emily suggested I'm the one who came to the rescue, because it was quite the opposite. Because so here I am, I had Greater Boston Legal Services on the horn saying, help us, we have over 500 people who need help accessing unemployment and pandemic related unemployment insurance, and we don't have enough people to actually do it. We were willing to stand up the project in some meaningful way. At the same time, I got a phone call from the folks in the co-op office. So again, Northeastern's program, students are half the time in class, academic quarter, half the time on co-op, where they're actually doing work, usually legally supervised work in an organization. The co-op office called me and said, hey, we've got a ton of students whose co-ops are being pulled because of the pandemic. Do you have any extra work that could keep folks occupied full time? And I said, are you kidding? Yes, absolutely. We could use work. The first thing I did was hire 3 law student project managers to begin managing this project. Before we even had a conception of what the project was going to look like, I had the project managers in the door. We originally got, when we first went out for a call to students, say, would you like to join this team of law students helping people apply for unemployment insurance? We had about 50 student participants who originally signed up as volunteers or in some way. And the law school, I have to say, was a really, really helpful partner in that they were extremely flexible, different types of ways that we could incentivize people to participate. So we were able to pay people work study using their work study funding. That's the first thing. We were able to provide independent study credit for every 42.5 hours of work that people put in to the project. They could get 1 academic credit. And the folks in registrars and the folks who run the academic side of the school were totally comfortable with us providing those independent study credits on a sort of flexible means. So do the work in the summer quarter, but get the academic credit in the fall quarter. So they were very comfortable with us as long as people were putting in the hours. And of course, we also had volunteer opportunities. So that's what we were able to stand up very early. Again, Emily's going to go in a second into some of the details, but overall, what it looked like, the entirety of the project basically ran for 6 months. Over the course of that 6 months, I had a total of 6 project managers. These are full-time law students working as project management. We had 90 students who signed up to help in some meaningful way. Out of those 90 students, we covered 19 languages, and we were able to help a total of 500 people in the Boston metropolitan region apply for and secure unemployment insurance during the pandemic. So that's the big picture of what we did. Now I'm going to turn it over for a chunk of time to Emily, who's going to walk through the details of how we actually stood this up. Our hope is that, again, and we have taken this project and used it as now the model for what we're doing in the housing and eviction context. So we're standing up a similar project to deal with the wave of evictions that are coming. And so this is a model that we hope that people might be able to gain some insight and use it for themselves going forward. So I will turn it over to Emily, and she will just direct me when to advance the slides.
Thank you, Dan. So the project recruited students by advertising through the weekly newsletter, as like I mentioned earlier, and we managed it through a Google form, which I think just became a staple for this project, and then like everything else that was happening during the pandemic. So we also brought the Poverty Law Clinic into the fold. So one of the things, as Dan was saying, we had to contend with was how to convince students to volunteer, which was both easy and difficult. Like, because there were some students who were eager and had some didn't have anything to do because they had lost their co-ops or just had extra time because their extracurriculars were canceled. Other commitments went away. But then others were kind of overwhelmed and didn't know if they could take on the extra work. Apologize if you can hear the horns honking outside. Or they were kind of just intimidated by the fact that all of the work was virtual, which was, I think, a very new thing for all of us. But one of the things we definitely banked on was the fact that the project was very experiential. So we were working with unemployment claimants, which is highly analogous to legal client interaction. So triaging issues and coming up with solutions and guiding a client through issues until it was resolved. So we were able to get about an equal amount, I think, of students on co-op and in class. And we had all three classes of the law school represented. So like Dan said, we offered work study sponsorship and independent study credit for those who were eligible. And we directed those who were interested in the financial aid office to help them work that out. And that was another helpful aspect of the project, I think, because even for those who didn't need the co-op hours, the pandemic eliminated a lot of on-campus work study opportunities that students would normally take during the semester to cover expenses that went away because there weren't analogous jobs online. And then our students volunteered for anywhere between 3 to 10 hours, or 3 to 10 plus hours, actually. And we asked who spoke what languages or who had employment law interest and experience, and we went from there. You can change the slide. So we had two different streams of client intake. This is the first one. So this is the clients who are the workers seeking assistance from the immediate Northeastern community, and our student workers, workers at local businesses on or near campus, and then staff of the university themselves or itself. I think these were kind of difficult to find actually because we were struggling to advertise our program just because there wasn't exactly like a way that we could reach all of these different facets of the community. Dan, if you want to explain how we advertised that a little more, because that was kind of before my time.
Sure, yeah, and I actually forgot to mention that at the beginning. So there were actually two streams, potential streams of referrals. One was for workers on campus, Northeastern University workers who were being these are folks who worked for things like food services who were being temporarily laid off while the university stopped in-class or in-person operations. That was one stream. The other stream was the stream coming from Greater Boston Legal Services. And so the Northeastern stream was a stream where we actually were going out and offering this source to folks in our community. And that's the stream that Emily was referring to as requiring some level of sort of marketing and advertisement. We never really got much uptake from that stream. We got a ton. All 500 people that we were able to help came from the Greater Boston Legal Services stream. Thank you for reminding me of that. I forgot to cover that.
No problem. Yeah. So we asked for emails and phone numbers, what language they preferred, and then we had some volunteer translators from the university to help us if we didn't have any project volunteers at the time who spoke Spanish, which ended up not being a problem at all. And majority of the clients that reached out did speak Spanish. So our volunteers would sign up to help these workers, and they would reach out and take care of their claims. And then we would track any communication that we had with the worker, when their claim was submitted, and so on. You could switch the slide. Actually, apologies. Yeah, so this is shows the rest, kind of like the workflow that we had, just like when was the contact made, just to keep track of like all the activities so nobody slipped through the cracks. You can switch the slide again. So our second stream of clients came from our partnership with Greater Boston Legal Services, and they had done outreach to the Greater Boston community to offer with help with unemployment applications, particularly for those who didn't speak English or didn't have easy access to a computer. So as Dan was saying, the Massachusetts unemployment application was an online only process, and it was only available in Spanish and English, but not online. And I don't think it was available in Spanish for a few months into the pandemic, or at least a few weeks. And there was certainly no more mobile format in the Spanish language for several months. And then a lot of our clients didn't have a desktop or laptop and obviously couldn't get to a library or anywhere else with public computers. So fortunately, the weekly certification process could be done over the phone. So it was, as long as they got the initial application done, they were okay going forward without a computer and just doing the certification over the phone with the help of our volunteers. So this screenshot shows our side of the operation. So students, volunteers would look at the GBLS spreadsheet, which isn't this one, but I didn't have a screenshot of that. But sign up for the clients, copy their information over to our spreadsheet, which is this one that you see here, and keep track of their progress until the claim was finished. Part of my job as the project manager was to make sure all the data was remaining consistent across those two spreadsheets and that clients weren't slipping through the cracks or getting double effort. And then sometimes we would do initial outreach to the client and they would tell us that they'd managed to figure it out since they'd reached out to GBLS. So we'd close those cases immediately. Others we would find out that they just weren't eligible, whether if they were undocumented or just didn't satisfy the requirements to get unemployment. But we'd go through their options and refer to them to other organizations and opportunities. So I think you can see on the spreadsheet somewhere that we had an undocumented worker who was ineligible for traditional unemployment, but we referred them to the Massachusetts Undocu Fund so that they could maybe have a second avenue for relief. And then we had a document outlining all those different opportunities and what qualified a person for each, so it was easy to reference for our volunteers. Next slide. So the unemployment application was complicated, even if you knew what you were doing. I applied myself when I was laid off from my part-time job, and it was, I think it took me like 4 hours just to do it myself. So we had to have a lot of training materials developed between us and GBLS and with materials put out by the Department of Unemployment Assistance so that our volunteers were able to help clients as effectively and efficiently as possible. So that took the form of like our training packets, which would have screenshots of the application themselves with these boxes and notes to say, this is what you do here, this is what you do here, this is what you need information-wise from the client. And I think that was extremely helpful. It was certainly helpful for me. Next slide. Another useful tool that we had was a number of workflow charts so that our volunteers knew exactly what to do with each client. So this flow chart here demonstrates the basic process that a typical client who needed typical help with completing an application would require. So we had other workflow charts indicating how to elevate certain issues to attorneys at GBLS, such as when there need to be appeals made. And so a lot of the job was really just triage. So most of the clients I worked with had already tried applying and just needed extra help. And it was something that we basic volunteers could help with. But other times it was their password wasn't working, so that needed to be elevated, or it was saying that they were ineligible when they knew that they were, things like that. So we were really just extra manpower for GBLS to sift through the requests for help so that we could direct our clients to where they needed to go, and then helping the ones that we were able to help, which ended up being a significant amount. Next slide. So a primary task for the volunteer managers was answering volunteer questions. We facilitated this by encouraging direct email to whoever was managing, but we also had a Google form and this spreadsheet available for those who didn't know who to email or didn't feel comfortable directly emailing me or my coworkers. And then we made the spreadsheet available to all of our volunteers so that they could look to see if their question had been asked already, and it just kind of created this body of knowledge for easy reference. Next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, a majority of our clients were non-English speaking and a majority spoke Spanish. So GBLS developed a slew of these translations so that our non-Spanish speaking volunteers like myself could reach out to Spanish speaking clients via text. And if they had problems that weren't conducive to text conversation, we'd be able to refer them to somebody or find a physical translator to assist us on a phone call. So I personally completed quite a few clients solely using texts and Google Translate with a little extra Googling for the nuance and making sure everything was being translated correctly. And they were enormously helpful. And I was using them 3 days ago. I had adapted them for our immigration clinic here at the law school.
Really?
Yeah, because
that's great.
We're working on migrants at the border, and they all speak Spanish and I don't, so I had to figure out how to help. So
And
yeah.
I'll mention on this slide, just I'm sorry to interrupt so all these materials that you're seeing, the workflow charts, the spreadsheets of questions and information, the introductory text for Spanish speakers, all this stuff was developed over time, starting in the spring into the summer and constantly iterated and evolved.
Next slide, yeah, okay. Another tool we had to streamline our work was email templates. We had a series of email templates that covered a variety of the most common problems that would require elevation to the GBLS lawyers or the project managers. And those emails would include like editable descriptions of the problem, as well as like a list of all the information you would need from the client to resolve that claim. So the volunteer just had to go and collect all of the relevant information from the client, send along the email, and then the delegated person at GBLS would be able to help. Next slide. And then finally, this is a screenshot of our daily, weekly, and ad hoc project manager tasks. Some weeks, these would take up a majority of my day. Other weeks, I would just be doing client outreach because there were more hours than this required. But I personally found project managing to be really rewarding. I got to talk to a lot of my fellow students about their experiences helping clients, and I think it was definitely like a bright spot in a pretty depressing time. And I remember one of our volunteers emailed us with a question, and I found out that then like, not only were they helping their elderly client fill out the unemployment claim and doing the weekly certification, but they were also going to their house every weekend to help them certify and to buy them groceries, and just going like this extra step. And I think that really like demonstrates how our students at Northeastern are, but also just like the willingness that people and students especially were to get involved with this crisis.
I also got a fair number of those comments as well that were just really, it was a really wonderful thing to hear from the students who were saying, I was looking for something meaningful to do to help the world respond to this crisis. This gave me that opportunity. And without that, I might have not been so comfortable sitting at home in isolation for as long as I did. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, that's okay. I was pretty much on that. I just think it's really easy to be negative, and I still find myself being negative. But like thinking about, especially the pandemic just goes on longer and longer. But like those little instances, I think are definitely like a balm of sorts, just to like look back on and be like, yes, the world is not as terrible as it might seem.
These project manager tasks, keep in mind, these project manager tasks, again, evolved over time. It looked very different in March and April. The daily, weekly, and ad hoc project management tasks certainly evolved over time. This is sort of where it landed at the end. So in terms of best practices, what we my mindset anyway, the first thing to do if you are someone in a university setting who is standing up a rapid response project like this, I really feel very strongly about this. Hire your student project managers first. Before you've even determined exactly what the need is and exactly what the volume is going to be, do what you need to do to get some students in who can help you actually stand up the project as project managers. It was certainly not a job that I would have been able to do by myself, given everything else that we had. And that is, folks like Emily come on board, this project would not have happened. We, at least for the first 3 months of the project, we did daily 30-minute stand-up scrum meetings where the student project managers and myself, a representative often from the poverty law clinic, which was taking on some cases, and every now and then a representative from GBLS, we would convene for 30 minutes at the same time every day via Zoom for a scrum meeting to sort of work through all the little bits and pieces that need to be worked through. It was out of those meetings that came all the training materials and all of the additional resources like the flowchart that Emily was showing. Prioritize language abilities based on community need. That's absolutely crucial. Language justice is crucial to a lot that we do here at the New Law Lab, and we're certainly experiencing it now in the eviction defense context. So you want to be mindful of exactly what language abilities are your student volunteers and helpers have, and you want to prioritize those. So we actually went out with specific advertisements asking for Spanish language capability. And that continued, like I said, that's continuing. I can't emphasize enough the importance of obtaining flexibility from leadership regarding credits and other incentives. Northeastern is a really great place for that. We are exploratory experimental law school to begin with our co-op program and with our social justice focus. So the mindset here is one of, okay, let's solve a problem and let's figure out how to do it. So it was not a heavy lift for me to make the case to our academic dean to give students independent study credit for this time. It was not a heavy lift at all. And even the central registrars at the university were on board. Everybody saw the crisis, everybody saw all the different levers that we were going to be able to pull to get students engaged. And then the last thing I'll say, this is just from my perspective, delegate, delegate, delegate. Again, I would never have been able to do this project without all the fabulous student project managers. The fact that we are an experiential learning law school means that we have a lot of students, upper level students, who have a fair amount of work experience, even by the time they're in the middle of their second year, because they've just come through a co-op. So delegate, delegate. The students are more than capable of being able to run this with very little supervision from me anyway. By the time we got to the end of the summer, Emily was basically running this project, and I think we were only down to once a week stand-up calls, if I recall correctly. Yeah, I think that's all the slides. I see that Evelyn has asked a question in the chat. So let's see. The question is this something you're thinking of continuing even after we move back to normal or the new normal? Yes, in fact, we are continuing this work in a couple different ways. First of all, excuse me, our poverty law clinic here at Northeastern Law School continues to take on unemployment insurance cases. So there's a handful of cases that have come through this project that are now actually being handled by students who are taking the poverty law clinic. So that means that flow is still happening. We no longer have the need, at least in the Metro Boston region, for this assistance. But because of all the hard work that Emily and the other project managers did, if we need to stand this project up again, I can turn it on literally like with a flip of the switch. I hire another student project manager to help stand it up. We go out with a call for help and we build a team of students. I will say so we're doing this now, Evelyn, in the housing context. So as I'm sure you're aware, the pandemic has disrupted a lot of people's incomes. There's a lot of people who are very far behind on rent. As in many other jurisdictions in Massachusetts, we have a number of government programs that have come online or have been online that provide rental assistance for tenants who are behind. We call it RAFT, rental assistance tenants here in Massachusetts. And of course, some additional dollars are coming in as a result of the 1.9 trillion recovery bill. And so we're standing up a project to help with housing insecurity and housing instability, having students do the same type of work, except in applying for these rental relief programs instead of unemployment insurance. The one thing that's different, I will say, and it's quite notable, is the number of law students who actually have time on their hands to take on this work. The disruption of the pandemic at first, and the fact that it disrupted our academic calendar, it disrupted student learning, it disrupted co-ops, actually resulted in a significant amount of people with available time on their hands who wanted to do something to help others. We were able to leverage that to build that 90 student team. Right now, I've got 22 students signed up for the eviction defense project, which is just a fraction of what we had going for the unemployment project. Are there other questions? We have our contact information up there. If anybody is ever interested in standing up a project like this, by all means, don't hesitate to contact me or Emily. Emily's email will only be good while she's a law student, but I can put you in touch.
I think you mentioned, like, while I was working for you, that you couldn't find all my emails whenever you would search them because my name would just like bring up every other email in your inbox. Because
yes, with the last name Law, when you work at a law school and you search law, it's not very. It's a little bit challenging. Let's see. So Evelyn also dropped into the chat. Before pandemic, our business students were doing tax preparation services for the community and our students. It was much needed, so I know this is an amazing job. Thank you. That's helpful to know. Yeah, this is a model that definitely can be scaled out in multiple different ways. And it's really important for me to point out also that you don't need to be a lawyer or a law student to do any of this work, right? So the eviction work that we're doing now, building on, using this same model, we're actually creating a bunch of trainings to train the mutual aid East Boston community groups into how to help people prepare their RAFT applications. So there's, we're going to be expanding that to go out beyond the law school into the undergraduates, other parts of the university, because it's not a requirement that you have any legal training to do this. It helps in some contexts, right? I mean, we actually had to be very clear that we were not actually providing legal advice or legal representation. We had to flip that over to the poverty law clinic if somebody needed somebody to represent them at an unemployment insurance appeals hearing. That went to the poverty law clinic or back to GBLS. Our students didn't handle that. We had to be very clear about that. There's no way that I would have been able to provide that level of supervision for legal representation for 500 people over the course of 6 months. Oh, can you talk about what budget was needed of grant funding? So that is a fine question. So we actually, for this one, so the domestic violence work, we ended up pulling in a fair amount of money because it required an expansion of staffing. For this, it just became part of my lab. It became part of the new law lab. So it was all existing staffing, with the exception of the law student co-ops. So the full-time co-ops, which were, I believe, unpaid. The co-ops were unpaid. Okay, so at Northeastern's co-op program, some co-ops are paid, some are unpaid. A lot of the social justice public interest co-ops are unpaid to begin with. So we were unfortunately not able to actually offer pay. We didn't have any dollars coming in to do this project. We were just asked to stand it up as a public interest law school in the region. So we actually didn't have. I was able to, as I said, hire students on work study. So if you got a work study award, you all know how work study works. You get the award based on your individual need, and then you have a certain number of dollars. So I was hiring students at $20 an hour to do that. We also, as you're absolutely right, Marita, we paid an academic credit work study. We did everything. We pulled all the levers we possibly could: independent study credit, work study, whatnot. And then there were a couple places, a couple gaps. Like when I hired Emily to continue as a project manager into the fall, there was a gap before she could take on her work study, and I just dipped into my gift fund from people who've given the lab, $100 from time to time, just to make it work. Yeah. Marina says, incredible doing all this with no additional funding, but yes, it's true. That is true. I actually haven't focused on that. Maybe that's why I'm so exhausted. Any other questions for us before we wrap? We thank you very much, Evelyn and Vicki, for joining. Thank you for anybody out in the world who is watching this recording after the event. We remain committed to leveraging everything that we can as an academic institution to help solve world problems. That's one of the things that has always drawn me to the world of change making, to the world of social innovation and entrepreneurship. There's no shortage of students and student energy out there that want to be involved in these matters. And as Emily so eloquently put it, it actually gives people something really meaningful to do to help respond to a crisis. And so it can be done. You can stand these things up. It takes a lot of time at the front end, but once it's up and running, it runs pretty smoothly.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for attending. Great point, Evelyn. Yes, it gives your students an incredible experience for future job interviews.
Yeah, it was definitely
Absolutely.
my second co-op after this one.
Was it? What did it help get you?
Oh, it definitely helped. Yeah.
Okay,
I
good.
I think I talked about this 90% of that interview that I got with my immigration co-op over the summer, or over the fall.
Awesome. That's good to know.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.